Maneva na sema PENDREAM TV. PENDREAM TV de osia dem yopo.
Atiefo ne ahwefo yema obi biara kwa ba eba PENDREAM TV. Se na your first time oha. Subscribe to channel no na click the notification bell no so like jumadi no na share ma afofron so ensa enkabi. Na yenko straight to nsema ya de besom no na we free Haruna Iddrisu, former minority leader, or the NSMB atudra ewo parliament. Me pesa obekame na yakotie nsema Haruna Iddrisu edituja.
This house, as you've guided it, is governed by our rules. When you see the item the clerk at table has just read, request for the reissue of parliamentary resolution. Reissue of parliamentary resolution. Parliament just doesn't reissue resolutions. If you want to rescind a decision that this house took, say so and do so in accordance with our rules. But to reissue a resolution, Parliament passed a loan agreement, and that agreement is being tweaked. If you want to tweak it, come properly. You cannot say reissue a resolution. Parliament does not just sit down to reissue resolutions. No, Mr. Speaker. So this is irregular, and I think that the leader of government business should set it aside, do further consultations. There was a loan agreement approved for a certain purpose. If you want to vary the intent and objective of the utilization of that loan agreement, then rescind the original motion and resolution that was so passed by Parliament. But to say that you are referring this, Mr. Speaker, and that is why I rose. You want to refer to Finance Committee to reissue a resolution. Reissue one resolution. And an amount of $350 million to finance capital and growth related expenditure. And Mr. Speaker, let me go to our standing orders. When you say a resolution, the resolution captures the purpose and intent of any loan agreement approved in accordance with Article 181 of the Constitution. So you cannot be reissuing a resolution. I think that this is very, very irregular, and I think that is not consistent with the 1992 Constitution, Article 181(1), and more importantly, our standing orders. I don't see how Parliament can reissue a parliamentary resolution, approval letter. When we approve, Mr. Speaker, and you are conveying, the second line says approval letter. You are conveying the decision of this House. And that decision reflects what happened in this House. You cannot so moto decide that you are reissuing a resolution by a letter. I have a difficulty accepting the route that we want to pass this process to. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable Member, a letter was written to me on this matter because of the reasons you just adduced. I thought the proper thing is for us to be considered by the committee that reported on the matter. The committee will consider it, report back to the House, and it is the House that can raise the issues that you are raising for deliberation, and at the end of the day is a decision of the House that will now be communicated back to the ministry. So I agree with you, but the procedure, this is what we have to do. So I will refer the said request to the Committee of Finance for consideration and report to the House. Honorable members, item 7B.
Right, Honorable Speaker, Honorable Members of Parliament, I stand before you on the authority of His Excellency President Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo to present the mid-year fiscal policy review of the budget statement and economic policy of the Government of Ghana for the 2023 financial year. Today's presentation is in fulfillment of Section 28 of the Public Financial Management Act 2016, Act 921, and Regulation 24 of the Public Financial Management Regulation LI 2378. I respectfully, Mr. Speaker, request that the entire 2023 mid-year fiscal policy review document is captured in the Hansard. Mr. Speaker, 8 months ago, I presented a 2023 budget statement and economic policy of the government in Kabom budget. At the time, the economy was going through a very difficult period amidst unprecedented global turbulence. This was within the context of major external shocks coupled with domestic vulnerabilities triggered by credit rating downgrades, tightened domestic financing conditions, and increased costs of borrowing, with the cost of shipping a container increasing sevenfold in the 18 months following March 2020. Just about every country in the world grappled with soaring prices from 2021. Our country, like many others globally, experienced unusually sharp increases in food, fertilizer, and fuel prices, rising inflation, and exchange rate depreciation, leading to severe economic challenges and hardships for our people. A headline in the December 2022 edition of The Economist captured the global situation in these words, quote, 2022 has been a year of brutal inflation. Mr. Speaker, it is no exaggeration to say we cannot find another period in our history where so many different headwinds hit our economy at the same time with unrelenting speed and scale. Thankfully, as the members are beginning to show, and as many honorable members of the House have indicated to me in our engagements, we have together as a nation turned the corner. Turned the corner, Mr. Speaker. We have avoided the unimaginable, but what could have been so easily possible under different leadership circumstances. With a lot of effort, we have managed to avoid empty shop shelves for medicines and other essentials. We have seen no shortage of food. We have been spared the frustrating spectre of long queues for fuel at our filling stations, and we have managed, in spite of all the challenges, to keep the lights on. Indeed, as the psalmist said in Psalm 118:23, this is the Lord's doing, and it is marvelous in our eyes. This turning the corner is underpinned by the investments and sacrifices we have collectively made during the difficult period since March 2020. Mr. Speaker, it is important that we acknowledge some of the major milestones that this country has experienced in the last 3 years. We should, quote, be still and appreciate that despite our challenges as a country, we have been saved from many extreme conditions that others have suffered, including peace, health, security, continuous supply of power, and life itself indeed. Over the period, the country has gone through extremely difficult circumstances, and the gratitude of His Excellency the President and his government goes to the good people of Ghana for their patience, understanding, and positive contributions to government efforts to weather the storms. During the COVID-19 period, we indeed lost family members and friends. But it's also true that Ghana recorded some of the lowest cases of mortality and infections worldwide. This was due to the implementation of a swift and robust COVID-19 response program led by His Excellency the President. We recorded 171,653 COVID-19 cases and 1,462 unfortunate deaths, as against 10.8 million cases recorded and 228,738 deaths on the African continent alone, and 249 million recorded cases and 2 million deaths in Europe. We invested immensely in education to ensure that school years were not disrupted, And we did so because we knew the alternative would be significantly costlier to our society. That was why the President ensured that our children return to school earlier to write the examinations to enable us to build the requisite human capital for the future and for them not to lose a precious year. We ensured consistent power supply and kept the lights on to enable businesses and households function despite the increasing cost of legacy energy agreements. We continued paying salaries and wages of all public sector employees and kept everybody at work without laying off our workers, and factored in a 30% increment of base pay for workers on single spine salary structure this year. We invested, Mr. Speaker, in the security of the nation and protected our citizens, including the lives of the 1.1 million visitors who responded to our Beyond the Year of Return program, thus boosting tourism in the middle of the crisis. And we cleared up and strengthened the financial sector to promote entrepreneurship and private sector businesses, including agriculture, tourism, and hotels, manufacturing, etc. Mr. Speaker, 2022 was the most difficult year for me as Ghana's finance minister. On July 1st, 2022, we took what was then a difficult but necessary decision to request support from the IMF to implement our post-COVID-19 program of economic growth. The country was going through a dire period of economic uncertainties and despondency. Mr. Speaker, we have turned the corner, and more importantly, we are determined to continue down that path. Soon, we expect the measures taken resulting in economic activity and anything experienced in the history of the Fourth Republic. Our plans and programs should soon lead to a sustained increase in domestic production, including manufacturing and farming, replacing many of the products that we are used to importing. Mr. Speaker, when I presented the 2023 budget in November last year, I indicated that we will pursue major fiscal and monetary policy measures within the framework of the PCPEG. Our coordinated response to the macro fiscal challenges, which His Excellency the President charged us to develop in March 2022 before going to the IMF, that's the PCPEG. As a first step towards fulfilling this objective, Parliament passed the revenue and expenditure measures as well as several other macro fiscal economic policies.
Honourable Minister, just a minute, the First Deputy Speaker to take the chair.
2023 budget in November last year, I indicated that we will pursue major fiscal and monetary policy measures within the framework of the PCPEG. Our coordinated response to the macro fiscal challenges, which His Excellency the President charged us to develop in March 2022 before going to the IMF, that's the PCPEG. As a first step towards fulfilling this objective, Parliament passed the revenue and expenditure measures as well as several other macro-critical economic policies we presented in the 2022 budget, and we are grateful for that. Along these lines, we also needed to create additional fiscal space by negotiating an International Monetary Fund program, 2, concluding a debt operations program, and 3, attracting significant investments, especially green investments, for a vibrant growth strategy. Mr. Speaker, I can now report that we have been diligent and resolute in implementing these measures and successfully negotiated the $3 billion US 3-year IMF ECF program, which was approved on 17th May 2023 to support the implementation of our PCPEG. Concluded on February 14th the initial part of the debt operations, of which the domestic debt exchange program. Developed a framework for the V20 Climate Prosperity Plan to attract climate investments from the private sector, and initiated the Mutual Prosperity Dialogue to crowd in domestic and external private investment to underpin our growth strategy. These achievements have been with the support and commitment of this august House and the Ghanaian people. It demonstrates that when we speak with one voice we can achieve what we set our minds to do. Genesis 11:6, if as one people speaking the same language, we have begun to do this, then nothing we plan to do will be impossible for us. Right Honorable Speaker, accordingly, His Excellency President Akufo-Addo has asked that I convey his profound gratitude to this House for passing all the revenue bills as well as expenditure measures. Indeed, our sincere gratitude also goes to all investors, financial institutions, and bondholders for the sacrifice and perseverance in this difficult period of our country's economic history. We appreciate your contribution towards turning the corner and commitment to partner us in transforming the economy. We must also extend our appreciation to the IMF, the World Bank, and other development partners, as well as the G7 and G20 members who have stood so strongly with us. Mr. Speaker, for the first 6 months of the year, we continue making progress to exceed our non-oil revenue targets for the year. We have seen improvements in non-oil tax revenue collection despite some notable shortfalls in VAT. However, oil revenues are falling short of expectations due to changes in global prices. We will therefore undertake a downward review of the oil-related revenue as well as the corresponding expenditures to align with the underperformance of some of our revenue handles. Specifically, this will impact the annual budget funding amount. Mr. Speaker, in view of the reasons outlined above, as well as the lower domestic interest payment and amortization following the completion of a part of the DDEP and the reduction in the foreign finance capex, the appropriation has been revised from Ghana cedis 227.7 billion as presented and approved in November 2022 to 206.0 billion Ghana cedis. This is in line with Regulation 24, Sub-Regulation 3 of Public Financial Management Act Regulation 2019, LI 2378. Mr. Speaker, we will therefore not require a supplementary budget. Mr. Speaker, Government is, however, committed to pursuing a robust growth strategy within the limited fiscal space and our fiscal consolidation program. This will be done by attracting domestic and foreign private sector investment and expanding production, which will be encouraged and stimulated by government policies and agencies. Government's mutual prosperity dialogue with the private sector will seek to facilitate the ease of doing business in order to crowd in private, domestic, and foreign investments. Mr. Speaker, security continues to be a priority of government. The United Nations recently reported that over 1,800 terrorist attacks resulting in nearly 4,600 deaths were recorded in our West Africa region in the first 6 months of this year. Due to this instability, among others, increasing numbers of West African citizens are seeking refuge in our country. This has required a review of our security expenditures within the limited fiscal space. Mr. Speaker, this 2023 mid-year fiscal policy review will therefore provide an update on economic performance for the first half year of 2023 and outlook for the rest of the year. Provide an update on the implementation of the IMF-supported PCPEC, including update on structural reforms and the progress towards achieving the quantitative performance criteria and indicative targets. Provide an update on the debt restructuring program, present a revised 2023 fiscal framework which aligns with the IMF-supported PCPEC, and outline government's growth strategy to drive the recovery process. I will now proceed to update the House on the macro-fiscal performance of the economy since 2022. Mr. Speaker, as we usually do, the 2023 budget was presented in November 2022 using end September 2022 data. We now have end December 2022 data, which indicates that overall real GDP growth was 3.1% compared to the revised target of 3.7%. Non-oil real GDP growth was 3.8% compared to the revised target of 4.3%. end December inflation rates of 54.1% compared to the projected 28.5%. Total revenue and grants for the period amounted to 96.7 billion, 15.8% of GDP, compared to the revised target of 96.84 billion, 16.4% of GDP. Total expenditure on commitment basis amounted to 165.1 billion Ghana cedis, 27% of GDP, against a revised target of 133.8 billion, 22.6% of GDP. Overall budget deficit on commitment basis was 11.8% of GDP, against a revised target of a deficit of 6.3% of GDP. Primary balance on commitment basis was a deficit of 4.3% of GDP, against a revised target of a deficit of 0.7% of GDP. On cash basis, the overall budget deficit was 10.7% of GDP, against a revised target of a deficit of 6.6% of GDP. The corresponding primary balance on cash basis was a deficit of 3.2% of GDP, against a revised target of a surplus of 0.4% of GDP. And gross international reserves was equivalent to 2.7 months of import cover. Mr. Speaker, with approval of Parliament, government set out to achieve the following key macroeconomic targets for 2023. Overall real GDP growth of 2.8%, non-oil real GDP growth of 3%, end December inflation rate of 18.9%, overall budget deficit of 5.9% of GDP on commitment basis, and 7.7% on cash basis. Primary balance commitment basis of a surplus of 0.7% of GDP, and a deficit of 1.1% of GDP on cash basis, and gross international reserve to cover not less than 3.3 months of imports. As I've indicated, we have made significant progress on restoring macroeconomic stability, and the narrative is changing. The economy is showing signs of recovery, the exchange rate has stabilized, inflation has softened, and interest rates have declined since December 2022. Mr. Speaker, these outturns are the results of focused implementation of all the measures we presented in the 2023 budget and the positive sentiments arising from the progress of the IMF program, which I will now discuss. Mr. Speaker, towards addressing the macro-fiscal challenges the economy faced in 2022, government engaged the IMF to support the implementation of our
PENDREAM TV. Now, so far so good. Say open online portal e Ghana. Ah, nipa share, nipa follow, nipa comment here. To my best of knowledge, without any biases, PENDREAM TV.